The office was a tomb of silence, shattered only by the sharp crack of a coffee mug hitting the floor. Marcus Tate, mop in hand, stood frozen, his heart pounding as the young CEO, Ethan Caldwell, loomed over him, eyes blazing with a fury that felt personal, vicious, unearned. "You're done here," Ethan spat, his voice a blade slicing through the air. "Pack your things and get out now." Marcus, a black man in his mid-50s, had cleaned these floors for 20 years, his calloused hands mapping every corner of Caldwell Enterprises' gleaming headquarters. He'd seen CEOs come and go, their egos as polished as the marble he scrubbed daily. But Ethan, barely 30, with his Ivy League smirk and tailored suits, was different. His disdain for Marcus wasn't just professional, it felt like a grudge rooted in something deeper, uglier. That morning, Ethan had stormed into the break room, accusing Marcus of stealing a watch from his office. No proof, no questions, just a pointed finger and a decision made. The accusation stung worse than the firing. Marcus, a man who'd raised 3 kids on a janitor's wage, who'd never taken so much as a paperclip, stood accused of theft in front of his coworkers, their eyes darting away in shame. "You think I'd steal from you?" Marcus's voice was low, steady, but it carried the weight of decades of quiet endurance. His dark eyes locked onto Ethan's, searching for a flicker of reason. There was none. Ethan's face twisted, his privilege a shield he wielded without thought. "I don't think, I know," he snapped, tossing a grainy security photo onto the desk, a blurry figure in a janitor's uniform near Ethan's office. It could have been anyone, but Ethan saw only Marcus. The room felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken history. Marcus's co-workers, lingering outside the glass walls, watched in silence, their faces a mix of fear and outrage. They knew Marcus. They knew the truth. The confrontation wasn't just about a watch. It was about the way Ethan looked at Marcus, like he was less than human, a problem to be swept away like the dust on his floors. It was about the whispers Marcus had overheard for years, the "he's just a janitor" remarks that cut deeper than any blade. And now, it was about a young man with power, wielding it to erase a black man's dignity without a second thought. Ethan's voice rose, venomous. "You people always think you can get away with it." The words hung there, raw and ugly, stripping away any pretense. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. He'd lived worse. But Marcus wasn't just a janitor. He was a father, a veteran, a man who'd once saved a Lithia life that, unbeknownst to Ethan, tied them together in ways neither could have imagined. 25 years ago, Marcus had been a paramedic, racing through Chicago's streets to pull a young boy from a car wreck, his hand steady as he carried the child to safety. That boy, now a man, stood before him, firing him without a shred of gratitude. Ethan didn't know. How could he? His parents had never told him the story, too consumed by their wealth to mention the black paramedic who'd given their son a second chance at life. The office door swung open, and Sarah, the HR manager, stepped in, her face pale. She'd known Marcus since her first day at the company, had seen him stay late to help new hires, had heard his quiet wisdom over countless coffee breaks. "Ethan, you need to hear him out," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Ethan scoffed, waving her off. "He's a thief, Sarah. End of story." But Sarah didn't back down. She'd seen the security footage, knew it was inconclusive, and she'd seen something else: Marcus's personnel file, buried in the company's ancient records. It wasn't just a file, it was a revelation. "Ethan, look at this," Sarah said, sliding a yellow document across the desk. It was a newspaper clipping from 1999, faded but legible: "Local paramedic saves child in tragic crash." Marcus's name was there, alongside a photo of him in his paramedic uniform, his face younger but unmistakable. Ethan's eyes flicked over the page, then froze. The child's name stared back at him, Ethan Caldwell. His breath caught, the room spinning as the pieces clicked into place. Marcus wasn't just the janitor he'd dismissed. He was the man who'd saved his life. Ethan's face drained of color, his arrogance crumbling like ash. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, for the first time. The man he'd accused, humiliated, fired, wasn't just a name on a badge. He was a hero, a man who'd carried a bleeding boy from a mangled car, who'd given Ethan the chance to become the man he was today. And Ethan had repaid him with contempt. I didn't know," Ethan stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus stood tall, his silence louder than any accusation. "You didn't ask," he said simply, the words cutting deeper than Ethan's earlier venom. The room was a pressure cooker, the tension so thick it could choke. Sarah stepped closer, her voice steady now. "Marcus has given this company everything. He's not the one who should be leaving." The words hit Ethan like a slap. He'd built his career on control, on being the one who made decisions, but now he was unraveling, exposed as the one who'd misjudged, who'd let bias cloud his judgment. The co-workers outside the glass walls were no longer silent, murmurs of support for Marcus rippled through them, a chorus of loyalty Ethan couldn't ignore. Marcus could have walked away then, could have let Ethan drown in his shame. But he didn't. He stepped forward, his voice calm but piercing. "I don't want your pity, Mr. Caldwell. I want respect for me, for everyone who keeps this place running." His words weren't just for Ethan, they were for every person who'd ever been dismissed, overlooked, judged by the color of their skin or the title on their badge. Ethan's hands shook as he sank into his chair, the weight of his mistake crushing him. He'd fired a man who'd saved his life, a man whose worth he'd never bothered to see. The next morning, the office buzzed with a different energy. Ethan called a meeting, not in the boardroom, but in the break room where Marcus had spent countless hours cleaning. Every employee was their janitors, clerks, executives, all equal in that moment. Ethan stood, his usual polish replaced by raw vulnerability. "I was wrong," he began, his voice cracking. "Marcus Tate isn't just a janitor. He's the reason I'm standing here today." He recounted the story of the crash, his voice thick with emotion, and announced Marcus's reinstatement not as a janitor, but as a facilities manager, a role that recognized his decades of loyalty and skill. But the change went deeper. Ethan launched a company-wide initiative to address bias, to ensure no one else was judged the way Marcus had been. He met with every employee, listening to their stories, their frustrations, their truths. Marcus, now in a new role, became a quiet leader, his presence a reminder that worth isn't measured by a title or a paycheck. The company wasn't perfect, but it was trying, and that was a start. Marcus never spoke of the incident again, but his coworkers did. They told the story of the janitor who'd saved their CEO, not just from a car wreck, but from his own prejudice. They told it with pride, with hope, because it wasn't just Marcus's story, it was theirs. And Ethan, forever changed, carried a new weight, the debt he owed to a man he'd once tried to erase. The weeks following Marcus's reinstatement were a whirlwind at Caldwell Enterprises. The office, once a sterile machine of hierarchy, began to hum with something new: conversation, reflection, even discomfort. Ethan Caldwell, the once untouchable CEO, was no longer just a name on the letterhead. He was a man grappling with his own flaws, and his employees saw it. Meetings were no longer just about profit margins, they were about people. Ethan's initiative to address bias wasn't a glossy PR movie, it was messy, real, and raw. He brought in facilitators to lead workshops, not just for executives but for everyone, from the mailroom to the C-suite. Employees shared stories of microaggressions, of being overlooked, of feeling invisible. Marcus, now facilities manager, sat in these sessions, not as a speaker but as a listener, his presence a quiet anchor. Marcus's new role wasn't just a title change. He oversaw the maintenance teams, ensuring their voices were heard in decisions about the workplace. He advocated for better wages, safer equipment, and respect for the people who kept the building running. His office, a small room near the loading dock, became a hub for employees seeking advice or just a moment of kindness. Marcus didn't preach, he led by example, his steady hands and calm demeanor a contrast to the chaos of corporate life. Yet, he carried the weight of the past: Ethan's accusation, the sting of being reduced to a stereotype. He forgave, but he didn't forget. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling in a different way. The man who'd once strode through the office with unshakable confidence now second-guessed every decision. He'd always seen himself as fair, progressive even, but Marcus's story forced him to confront the blind spots in his worldview. He'd grown up in wealth, insulated from the struggles of men like Marcus. The crash that Marcus had saved him from was a blurry memory, overshadowed by a life of privilege. Now, that memory was a mirror, reflecting his ignorance back at him. Ethan spent late nights poring over company records, learning about the people he'd overlooked. He found stories of resilient janitors working 2 jobs, clerks supporting families, security guards with dreams deferred. Each file was a life, and he'd ignored them all. One evening, Ethan found Marcus in the break room, wiping down a counter out of habit. The sight hit Ethan hard. Marcus, still cleaning, still serving, even after everything. "You don't have to do that anymore," Ethan said, his voice soft. Marcus paused, his rag still in hand, and looked at Ethan with those piercing eyes. "Habit," he said simply, then added, "this place doesn't run without people like me." The words weren't accusatory, but they landed like a challenge. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm trying to understand that," he said. It was the first real conversation they'd had since the incident, and it felt like a fragile bridge between them. The bridge grew stronger over time. Ethan invited Marcus to speak at a company-wide town hall, not as a spectacle but as a voice of experience. Marcus hesitated, wasn't one for speeches, but he agreed, knowing it mattered. When the day came, the auditorium was packed, every seat filled with employees who'd heard the story of the janitor who'd saved their CEO. Marcus stood at the podium, his work boots still scuffed, his voice steady but emotional. "I've spent my life being invisible," he began. "Not just here, but everywhere. People see my skin, my job, and they decide who I am before I open my mouth." The room was silent, every word sinking in. "But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to build something better for all of us." He spoke of his years as a paramedic, of the lives he'd saved, including Ethan's. He spoke of his children, now grown, who'd faced the same prejudice he had. And he spoke of hope, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that grows from it. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can change what comes next." The applause was thunderous, not just for Marcus but for the truth he'd laid bare. Ethan, sitting in the front row, felt tears sting his eyes. He wasn't clapping for show, he was clapping for a man who'd given him more than a second chance at life, a second chance at humanity. The town hall sparked something bigger. Employees began organizing, not just within Caldwell Enterprises but across the city's corporate landscape. They formed a coalition to advocate for fair treatment, better wages, and an end to workplace discrimination. Marcus became an reluctant figurehead, his story a rallying cry. Local news picked it up, and soon, "The janitor who saved the CEO" was a headline that spread across social media. Some praised Marcus's grace, others debated Ethan's redemption, questioning whether a single act of contrition could erase years of bias. The story wasn't titty, it was complex, human, and divisive, just like the world it reflected. Ethan faced scrutiny too. Blogs and X posts dissected his actions, some calling him a hero for owning his mistake, others branding him a privileged opportunist who only changed when forced. He didn't shy away from the criticism. In a public statement, he admitted his failures, not just to Marcus but to every employee he'd undervalued. "I was wrong," he wrote, "and I'm learning. That's not enough, but it's where I start." The statement went viral, sparking heated debates about accountability, privilege, and the possibility of change. Some saw Ethan's journey as proof that people could grow, others saw it as too little, too late. Marcus, meanwhile, stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't want fame, he wanted change. He worked quietly with the coalition, mentoring younger employees and sharing his story when it mattered. One day, a young black janitor, Jamal, approached him, nervous but determined. They look at me the way they used to look at you, Jamal said. How do you keep going? Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling with hard-earned wisdom. You keep going because you're worth more than their judgment, he said. And you make sure they see it. Jamal nodded, his shoulders straightening, and Marcus knew the fight was far from over. The company's transformation wasn't perfect. Some employees resisted the changes, clinging to old hierarchies. Others embraced them, forming bonds across departments that hadn't existed before. Ethan and Marcus never became friends, but they built a mutual respect, forged in the crucible of their shared history. Ethan made it a point to greet every employee by name, to learn their stories. He funded scholarships for employees' children, inspired by Marcus's tales of his kids' struggles. Marcus, in turn, held Ethan accountable, calling out decisions that felt performative or short-sighted. Their relationship was a microcosm of the broader struggle, imperfect, ongoing, but hopeful. 1 year later, Caldwell Enterprises hosted a community event, not in a boardroom but in a local park, where employees and their families gathered. Marcus's children were there, grown and proud, watching their father cut the ribbon on a new community center funded by the company. Ethan stood beside him, no longer the brash CEO but a man humbled by his own reckoning. The crowd cheered, not just for the center but for what it represented, a step toward justice, however small. Marcus's daughter, Lena, hugged him tightly, whispering, "You did this, Dad." Marcus shook his head. "We did this," he said, looking at the crowd, at Ethan, at the future. The story of Marcus and Ethan didn't end that day. It lived on in the employees who felt seen, in the policies that began to shift, in the conversations that spread beyond the company's walls. It was a story of pain and redemption, of prejudice confronted and humanity reclaimed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in a world quick to judge and slow to heal, that was enough to keep fighting for. What do you think? Where does justice lie in this story, and how do we bridge the divides it reveals? Share your thoughts, because stories like this belong to all of us.